Imagine you are not arriving to a city the way we do today, no bright signs calling your attention, no constant engines, no glass towers reflecting the sun. Instead you arrive to Edo as a slow feeling first, a change in the air, a slightly different smell, a thicker hum of people and wood and water, and you do not even need to see the castle yet to understand that something heavy and organized is sitting at the center of everything. Because roads begin to behave differently, faces begin to behave differently, and your own steps start to match the pace of a place that has been trained to move in a certain rhythm for a very long time. Edo is a city that does not introduce itself with one single image. It does not say, "Here is the famous view, please take it and leave." It says, "Walk with me," and the more you walk the more you realize you are inside a system, a living machine built out of timber, paper, rules, habits, rain, rice, gossip, and the quiet pressure of authority. And even when you cannot see the authority directly, even when there is no official standing in front of you, the authority is still present, in the way a gate is placed, in the way a street turns, in the way a person lowers their eyes for just a moment longer than you would expect. If you come in early enough, when the sky is still pale and the edges of rooftops are a soft gray, you will hear the city before you fully see it, a distant knock of wood, a soft clatter of buckets, the first coughs of a waking neighborhood, and somewhere far away, faint, steady, like a heartbeat you did not notice until now, the sound of people already working, because Edo does not wake up all at once, Edo wakes up in layers. The water carriers and the early vendors moving first, then the cooks and shopkeepers, then the apprentices, then the steady wave of ordinary people who have learned that a day can slip away if you start too late. And in this city, ordinary is not one simple thing. Ordinary depends on where you stand, how you speak, what you wear, what you are allowed to touch, and what you must never touch, because Edo lives inside a social order that is supposed to be stable, a ladder that everyone can see even if no one wants to talk about it openly, samurai at the top in theory, farmers praised in words, artisans respected for skill, merchants frowned upon in official morals yet somehow holding the coins, and outside and below these categories, other lives too, the people who clean, the people who perform, the people who move through the city like shadows, necessary, present, rarely celebrated. But Edo is not just a lesson about class, it is a place where class becomes daily routine, and routine becomes the real story, because a city is not only built by big decisions, it is built by the small repeated motions of millions of hands, opening shutters, sweeping a doorway, folding cloth, boiling water, carrying a bundle, bowing at the right time, speaking in the right tone, placing your sandals neatly, avoiding trouble without even thinking of it as trouble. You might expect the samurai city to feel like armor and swords everywhere, but the first thing you notice is wood, the endless wood, wooden walls, wooden posts, wooden bridges, wooden carts, wooden signs painted with careful strokes, and then paper, paper windows, paper doors, paper lanterns, paper fans, and you start to understand why fire is not a distant fear in Edo. It is a constant background thought, like weather, like fate, like a rumor that never fully disappears. The streets are narrower than the grand roads you imagine in an empire, yet they are alive, they are organized in their own way, and the city is arranged like a conversation between power and practicality. Near the center, the castle and the samurai districts create a sense of controlled space, broad roads, guarded points, areas where you do not stroll casually, and farther out, the merchant and artisan quarters thicken into a more crowded human texture, long houses packed together, shop fronts. Close like neighbors, small alleys that feel like someone's private hallway, and in between all of it, canals, rivers, and bridges, because Edo is not just a land city, it is a water city too, a city that breathes through waterways, bringing in fish, rice, lumber, charcoal, and carrying away waste and stories. If you stand still at a corner, you can watch the city draw itself in front of you, a man with a shoulder pole carrying 2 buckets that sway like calm pendulums, a boy hurrying with a wrapped bundle, his sandals slapping the ground in a repetitive soft sound, a vendor calling out in a voice that is more melody than speech, because in Edo the street calls are part of the soundscape, not only for selling but for marking the hour, marking the season, marking the feeling of the morning. There is a particular kind of economy in those voices, the way people advertise without shouting too harshly, the way they repeat phrases until they become familiar, until someone hears it from inside a room and thinks, yes, now is the time to buy tofu, now is the time to buy fish, now is the time to buy charcoal before the rain starts again, and in that way, a city becomes a clock, not a clock of metal gears, but a clock of habits and expected appearances. And above the street level, you can sense lives stacked in thin layers, people behind screens, behind shutters, behind curtains, and even though you cannot see them clearly, you know they are there, because smoke rises from a cooking fire, because a laugh leaks out, because someone shakes a mat, because the smell of miso drifts into the air like a gentle announcement that breakfast is happening in many places at once. Edo is also a city of rules that often look like manners, and manners that often function like rules, and for someone new, it can feel like walking inside invisible ropes. You do not want to accidentally step into the wrong space, you do not want to face the wrong direction at the wrong moment, because in a world where status is real and consequences can be real too, people learn a kind of careful awareness. And this awareness shapes everything, it shapes the way you carry yourself, the way you keep your eyes, the way you respond to a superior, and it shapes the way strangers interact, polite distance, small bows, limited questions, and an acceptance that you may not know someone's full story and that is normal. The samurai themselves are not one single image either, some are proud and strict, some are tired and broke, some are young and eager, some are older and more interested in paperwork than fighting, and in Edo, many samurai live a life that is more administrative than heroic, tied to offices, records, duties, patrols, and ceremonial obligations. The sword is there, yes, the sword is a symbol and a tool. But daily life is often ink and schedules and the slow tension of keeping order in a city that never stops producing noise. The castle is the silent anchor, even when you do not see it, you feel its influence, because the city radiates outward from it like ripples, and the closer you get, the more the environment changes, the more the street feels like it belongs to someone else, guarded gates, controlled entrances, and the presence of officialdom, the kind of space that makes even your breath feel like it should be quieter. Farther out, in the common neighborhoods, the city feels warmer, busier, messier, and that is not an insult, it is simply human density, and in these areas you find the long row houses, the nagaya, where many families live close, sharing walls, sharing gossip, sharing the thin line between privacy and community, and if you imagine a peaceful isolated home, Edo will teach you a different idea. A home can be a small room, a few mats, a box for belongings, and a constant awareness that your neighbor is one paper wall away. In such a place, the city's real power is not only the shogunate's commands, It is also the neighborhood's eyes, because people watch each other, not always to judge, sometimes to help, sometimes to protect themselves, sometimes to keep the peace, and if someone behaves strangely, it becomes a topic quickly, and in a city where reputation is a kind of currency, that matters. As the morning advances, you notice the transformation from quiet to busy, shutters slide open like eyelids, shop signs become visible, and suddenly the city begins to announce itself as a marketplace, not only in big markets but everywhere, because Edo commerce is woven into daily walking. You buy as you go, you buy small portions, you buy what is fresh today, you buy what you can afford. And you learn that the city supports a vast network of small transactions, a handful of coins here, a credit note there, a favor remembered, a relationship maintained, because not everyone holds cash, and trust becomes a practical tool. And even though this is a time without modern advertisements, the city is not visually silent. You see printed images, woodblock prints sold and displayed, simple posters, shop names, symbols, lanterns, and the repeated patterns of certain districts, and if you stay long enough you will begin to identify places not by street names but by feeling. This corner smells like grilled fish. That lane always has a tailor's cloth hanging. This bridge is where people slow down and look at the water. That gate is where people straighten their posture. Edo also carries the feeling of seasons strongly, because the city is built of materials that respond to weather. Rain changes everything. It changes the smell of the street, it changes the way sandals sound, it changes the pace. Umbrellas appear, straw coats appear, the edges of rooftops drip like steady fingers tapping, and the city becomes shinier, darker, calmer, while inside rooms, small braziers, kettles, and warm bowls of food become more important than any grand plan. And in the middle of all this ordinary movement, you can find the floating world, the ukiyo, not only as entertainment but as an attitude, a recognition that life is uncertain, that pleasure is temporary, and that people will seek beauty in small moments, a well-made fan, a clever poem, a beautiful print, a perfect bowl of noodles eaten at the right time, and Edo becomes a city that can feel strict and playful at once, like a person who follows rules in public and laughs freely in private. But before we dive into the pleasure districts and theaters, we must stay with the city's bones, because the bones explain how everything else stands. Edo is supplied like a huge mouth, constantly needing food, fuel, wood, paper, cloth, and this supply does not happen by magic, it happens by boats, by carriers, by warehouses, by a rhythm of deliveries that people depend on without thinking. And when something interrupts that rhythm, a storm, a fire, a political order, prices can shift, moods can shift, and suddenly a normal day feels uneasy. So even the calmest boring day has invisible tensions. Will the rice price rise? Will the river flood? Will there be a fire in the next district? Will the local official inspect the neighborhood? Will an argument break out at the market? Will a child get sick? Will an apprentice make a costly mistake? And people learn to live with these tensions the way you live with background noise. You acknowledge it without letting it consume you. Because you still have to open the shop, cook the meal, sweep the doorway, and continue. If you want to truly enter Edo, you have to do something very simple. You have to walk slowly, not with the eyes of a tourist hunting a famous scene, but with the eyes of someone who wants to understand how a street becomes a life. You watch the small details, the way someone ties a bundle, the way a shopkeeper bows to a customer even if they are tired, the way a person pauses at a shrine, claps softly, prays quickly, then continues as if spirituality is part of commuting, not a separate event. And you start to notice that the city is full of small shrines and temples like punctuation marks, quiet places inserted into busy space, places where incense smoke rises, where wooden plaques hang, where travelers stop, where locals stop, and this religious presence is not always dramatic, it is routine, a quick nod, a quick offering, a quick request for safety, for business success, for family health. And in a city where life is fragile, routine prayers are like routine sweeping, you do them. Because they might help, because it feels wrong not to. Now imagine the same city at midday, the sun higher, the shadows sharper, the street denser, more voices, more smells, more footsteps, and somewhere a group of children run and laugh, and an older woman scolds them, not angrily, more like a practiced sound, because in a crowded city children are both joy and risk, they can be lost, they can break things, they can get hurt, and yet they must grow inside this environment. Learning the rules not from books but from watching adults and being corrected gently, or not so gently. The day continues like a river, and Edo is a river with many branches, the samurai branch, the merchant branch, the artisan branch, the laborer branch, the entertainer branch, and sometimes these branches touch, sometimes they stay separate, sometimes they collide in small moments, a samurai buying something, a merchant bowing deeply, an artisan demonstrating skill, an argument over price, a polite refusal, a silent tension that disappears as quickly as it appears. And what makes this perfect for our long boring story is that we can follow any one of these branches for hours, for days, for seasons, because Edo daily life is not one story, it is 1,000 small stories that repeat with slight variations, and repetition is exactly what creates the relaxing, sleepy, hypnotic feeling, the idea that the city keeps going, that you can sit in one place and listen to it like rain. And in that listening you begin to understand a world that is far away from us yet. Strangely familiar in its human needs, food, safety, belonging, reputation, routine, and a little bit of beauty to make it all feel worth it. So in this first part, we have stepped into Edo, we have felt its wood and paper, its water and rules, its layers and voices, and in the next part we will move closer to the home level, the Nagaya, the neighborhoods, the shared wells, the shared toilets, the shared gossip, the ways people cook, wash, sleep, argue, reconcile, and build a community out of thin walls and thick habits. And we will see how the city's big structure becomes a very small daily life, one room, one street, one morning at a time. In Edo, the city becomes real not when you stand near a famous bridge or imagine the distant castle, it becomes real when you step into the narrow space where most people actually live, where the air smells like yesterday's cooking, where the floor creaks in familiar places, where someone's laughter and someone else's complaint travel through thin walls like slow smoke, and you realize that home here is not a private island. It is more like a shared boat, many lives floating close together, moving with the same water, hearing the same storms. The Nagaya, the long row house, is one of the quiet engines of Edo, not glamorous, not meant to be admired from afar, but essential, because if you want to understand how Edo breathes, you have to understand how Edo sleeps, how it stores its bowls and clothes, how it keeps its children from falling into trouble, how it holds on to dignity when space is small and money can be smaller, and in Nagaya life, you will see the strange balance of strictness and warmth, of rules and improvisation, of Privacy and constant exposure. Picture a line of simple wooden rooms connected like beads, each unit a small world, often one main room with tatami mats, a few shelves, maybe a small alcove, maybe a chest for clothing, maybe a hanging place for tools, and in front, a narrow strip of walkway, an outside corridor where feet pass, where sandals are placed, where small baskets wait, where an umbrella dries after rain, and because this walkway is shared, the walkway becomes a social space too, the hallway of the neighborhood, the place where you notice who is sick, who is angry, who is returning late, who has purchased something unusual, who has a guest. There is a landlord or a manager figure, someone who keeps order and collects rent, not always cruel, sometimes practical, sometimes respected, sometimes disliked, and their job is not simply money, their job is peace, because in a place where so many lives are packed close, peace is fragile, and a small conflict can spread like fire, and fire is not only metaphorical here, fire is always waiting, always possible, always feared, always remembered. The first thing you notice is the sound of morning inside such a place. It is not one alarm, it is a slow rise of tiny noises, someone sliding open a screen, someone tapping ash from a brazier, someone coughing, someone stepping outside to fetch water, the soft slap of sandals, the scrape of a broom, the small voice of a mother telling a child to be quiet, and a neighbor telling the same child to be quiet too. Because everyone shares the same thin space of listening. Water is one of the daily rituals that shapes everything, because water is not unlimited and effortless, it is carried, fetched, stored, warmed, and used carefully. There are wells, there are shared sources, there are water carriers in the streets, and in many neighborhoods, people know exactly when the well is crowded, when the carriers arrive, when the price is slightly better, when it is wiser to go early before the day becomes heavy with other chores. And because water matters, washing matters in a different way, you cannot casually waste water, you learn to wash efficiently, you learn to reuse where possible, you learn to treat the act of bathing as something planned, often done at public bathhouses, because the bathhouse is not only hygiene, it is community, it is conversation, it is a social equalizer in some ways, because inside steam and warm water, the visible symbols of status soften, and people speak more freely, and we will go deeper into bathhouse culture later, because it is one of the most human parts of Edo daily life. Before we go to the bathhouse, we stay at home, and here, cooking is not an endless kitchen with many tools, it is a compact practice, charcoal, small stoves, pots, careful timing, and the smell of cooking is a neighborhood announcement. You know what your neighbor eats not because you spy, but because smell is honest, it travels, and the smell tells you whether they are doing well, whether they have fish today, whether they are eating simple rice with pickles, whether they have burned something, whether they are making soup for a sick family member. Food in Nagaya life often arrives in small portions, not huge storage, not weekly shopping, but daily purchasing, because fresh things spoil, because space is limited, because money flows in and out quickly, and you can imagine a woman sending a child to buy tofu, you can imagine an apprentice stopping at a stall to buy soba. You can imagine someone bargaining for vegetables near the end of the day when sellers are tired and willing to lower prices, and all of these small transactions become part of the daily walking patterns of the neighborhood. And because the neighborhood is dense, it has its own informal map, people know who lives where, the carpenter, the papermaker, the man who sometimes drinks too much, the widow who is strict but kind, the the young couple who argue quietly, the child who is always running, the old man who remembers fires from decades ago and still points at rooftops as if warning them, and in this way, the Nagaya becomes a living book. Each door a chapter, each household a story people can partially read. Privacy exists, but it is thin, and because it is thin, etiquette becomes important. You learn when to pretend not to hear, you learn how to cough in a way that signals you are present without sounding intrusive, you learn how to move quietly at night, you learn how to greet without over-greeting, and in Edo, this social intelligence is like another skill, like sewing, like counting coins, like writing. It makes life smoother. It reduces conflict, it protects everyone from shame. Shame is a powerful force in this world, not only personal shame but public shame, being seen as careless, as selfish, as disruptive, can harm your reputation and therefore your ability to borrow, to trade, to be trusted, so people often control themselves not only out of moral virtue but out of survival logic, because when your community is your safety net, you do not cut the net unless you want to fall. Now, imagine a typical morning task list inside a Nagaya room. The mats must be aired sometimes, the room must be swept, the cooking area must be cleaned, the charcoal ash removed carefully, the clothing arranged, the bedding folded, and because everything is small, everything must be organized. Clutter is not just ugly, clutter is danger, clutter is fire risk, clutter is inconvenience, clutter is conflict when space is shared. So people develop a discipline that looks simple but is constant, a form of daily maintenance that makes the city possible. Children grow up watching this discipline, not as a lecture, but as habit. They watch their mother fold and store, they watch an older sibling carry water, they watch neighbors sweep at the same time, and sweeping itself becomes almost ritual. The street in front of your door is not fully yours but you clean it anyway, because cleaning it is your public face. It says, I belong here, I respect this place, and if you do not clean it, someone else might comment, and comments in a close community can sting more than punishment. In some Nagaya, you may find shared facilities, a shared latrine area, a shared space for washing, and this brings us to another Edo reality, waste management, which sounds unromantic but is very important. Edo is a massive city, and it cannot survive if waste simply accumulates, so the city develops systems, some organized, some informal, and even human waste becomes a kind of resource, collected and used as fertilizer, traded, valued, and this is one of those details that makes you realize. Edo is not only culture and beauty, it is logistics, it is circulation, it is the city as a body that must digest and remove, otherwise it sickens. People learn to live with smells, with crowded spaces, with the occasional rat, with insects in certain seasons, and they develop practical solutions, raised storage, careful food handling, smoke to repel bugs, and again, these solutions are not grand inventions, they are repeated habits, and repeated habits are what make our long boring story feel steady, because you can almost hear the same broom strokes, day after day, year after year. And within this steady routine, there are tiny moments of joy, a neighbor sharing pickles, a child being praised for carrying water without spilling, a new piece of cloth bought after months of saving, a small festival approaching, a rumor that a famous kabuki actor will perform soon, a printed image passed hand to hand, and in such a world, joy is not always loud, it is often small and sweet, like warm tea in cold weather. The relationship between neighbors can be supportive, but it can also be tense, because closeness can create friction. Someone plays music too loudly, someone's child cries at night, someone borrows and forgets to return, someone's cooking smoke drifts into another space, and in Edo, these conflicts are usually handled through social pressure first, a comment, a look, a polite hint, and only later, if things become serious, through the landlord or local officials, because official involvement is never desired. It brings attention, and attention can be dangerous if it suggests disorder. When we speak of disorder, we must return to fire again, because fire is the nightmare that sits behind many Edo behaviors. The materials of the city are flammable, the rooms are close, the cooking fires are daily, the lamps are daily, the candles are daily, and wind can turn a small mistake into a disaster. So there are rules, there are watchmen, there are community awareness practices, and even inside a Nagaya, people learn where water buckets are kept, how to respond quickly, how to shout alarms, how to run without causing a stampede, because everyone knows someone who has lost something to fire, or everyone knows someone who knows someone, and the memory moves through the city like a warning song. At night, the Nagaya changes its personality, the corridor quiets, lantern light softens, the city sounds become more distant, and the thin walls become more noticeable. You hear whispers, you hear a couple talk quietly, you hear someone counting coins, you hear someone sighing, you hear a flute far away from another district, and in that moment you realize Edo is not only daytime commerce, it is nighttime survival too. Locking doors, hiding small valuables, trusting neighbors, and hoping that nothing dramatic will happen before morning. Inside a small room, bedding is laid out, futons unrolled, and the act of sleeping is not fully separated from the act of living, because the same space becomes your dining area, your working area, your sleeping area, and this flexibility becomes normal, and in a way, it makes life feel minimalist, but it also means that comfort is something you create through careful arrangement rather than through large furniture. And this arrangement is another kind of quiet skill. If you listen to the neighborhood after darkness settles, you can hear the distant calls of night watchmen, calling out the time and warning against fire, a human clock again, a human alarm, reminding everyone to be careful, and some people find comfort in those calls, because it means someone is awake and watching, someone is carrying responsibility through the night. Now, within these neighborhoods, there are also small local structures of organization, groups responsible for mutual aid, for reporting suspicious activity, for keeping records, and this is where the Tokugawa system becomes felt at street level. Power is not only in the castle, it is in paperwork, in neighborhood leaders, in shared accountability, because the shogunate wants stability. And stability is enforced not only by soldiers but by communities that must keep themselves orderly. And the result is that everyday life becomes a mixture of freedom and constraint. You can laugh, you can trade, you can create art, you can enjoy tea, but you also know you are visible, you are part of a web, and the web can tighten if you cause trouble, and this awareness shapes the city's character, creating a society that can appear polite and calm, while underneath it, people hold worries like stones in their sleeves. In the next part, we will follow people out of the neighborhood into the work world, the shops, the apprenticeships, the merchant houses, the small economies of credit and trust, and we will see how Edo's famous tension works. Merchants officially looked down upon yet economically powerful, samurai officially high yet sometimes financially strained, artisans respected for skill, and all of them connected by coins, debts, favors, and the daily need to keep the shutters open and the customers satisfied. So for now, we stay in the Nagaya corridor a little longer, We watch a woman shake a mat, dust floating briefly in the light. We watch a child chase a small toy. We watch an apprentice bow as he rushes to his master's shop. We watch a neighbor pour water into a basin, and we realize that this is Edo's true heartbeat, not the castle's silent strength, but the small repeated motions of ordinary people, making an enormous city feel, somehow, like a collection of connected homes. In Edo, money is not just coins, it is movement, it is timing, it is reputation, it is a nod from the right person, it is a note written carefully, it is the memory of a favor, and if you try to understand Edo only by imagining rich merchants and proud samurai, you miss the real daily economy, the small invisible river of transactions that keeps the city alive. Because Edo does not run on dramatic treasure chests, Edo runs on steady small payments, tiny credits, and people who know exactly what something is worth today, not in theory, but in the living air of the market. Walk out from the Nagaya neighborhood in the morning and you will feel the city pulling people into their roles. Shutters open, cloth is hung, boards are placed, charcoal fires begin, apprentices sweep the shop front not only because cleanliness matters, but because sweeping is a signal that the business is awake, ready, respectable, and you begin to see a social theater that repeats every day, shopkeepers standing in certain postures, customers approaching with certain politeness, the exchange of greetings that sounds humble but is actually a kind of code. I respect you, I respect your place, let us do business without conflict. The shops are not one category. Edo is a city where specialization grows like vines, tofu sellers, fishmongers, paper shops, umbrella makers, sandal sellers, comb makers, charcoal dealers, rice brokers, sake vendors, soy sauce sellers, miso sellers, noodle stalls, sweet shops, candle makers, and in between them, services too, barbers, repairers, scribes, entertainers, carriers, and the more you watch, the more you realize that Edo is not a single market, it is a woven fabric of small economies. Each thread depending on the others, because tofu depends on soy supply, soy depends on transport, transport depends on boats and carriers, carriers depend on meals and sandals, sandals depend on straw and craftspeople, and so on, until the entire city looks like one giant organism made of deals. One of the most important figures in this organism is the apprentice, because apprentices are the hands that keep shops running. An apprentice life is its own story of discipline, ambition, exhaustion, and small pride. A boy, sometimes very young, living in the merchant house, waking early, cleaning, carrying, learning to bow correctly, learning to speak correctly, learning prices and product knowledge slowly like memorizing a prayer. And if you think of apprenticeship as gentle education, Edo will show you it can be strict, a kind of shaping, because the merchant house is not just a workplace, it is a moral school, a behavior machine, training someone to become trustworthy enough to handle credit, goods, and customers. Trust, in Edo, is a currency that can be more valuable than coins, because not everyone can pay immediately, and not every purchase is meant to be immediate. Some businesses run on accounts, on monthly settlement, on relationships that last for years, and a shopkeeper learns which customers are safe, who always returns, who always delays, who has a good family name, who has a bad habit, and in this way, reputation becomes a practical tool, not just a social feeling, and when someone loses reputation, they lose access to smooth life, prices change for them, doors close, smiles cool, because Edo punishes unreliability quietly, with the coldness of everyday interactions. Coins exist, yes, and they matter, but Edo also uses written notes, ledger systems, and an entire culture of counting, because merchants count constantly. They count goods, they count damage, they count profit, they count risk, and even small shops keep records, sometimes formal, sometimes scribbled, but always present, because without records the city becomes chaos, and the Tokugawa world hates chaos. It loves stable predictable flows. Even when people complain about rules, they also depend on them. Now let us look at the class tension you always hear about. The official moral world says merchants are low, samurai are high, but walk in Edo and you see the quiet joke of reality. Some samurai are proud but broke, some merchants are officially humble but privately powerful, and everyone knows this, everyone sees it, yet everyone must perform the correct respect in public, and this creates a special Edo atmosphere. Like a stage play where the audience knows the truth but still enjoys watching. The proper lines being spoken. Samurai life in Edo is often not the battle life people imagine. It is administrative, it is service to a lord, it is paperwork, it is attendance, it is duty rotations, it is ceremony, and in many cases it is a life funded by stipends, often paid in rice or converted through systems, and because stipends can be fixed while prices can change, samurai often feel squeezed, because the city economy grows. Tastes change, goods become tempting, and suddenly the respectable warrior finds himself bargaining with a merchant, borrowing from a merchant, or reducing expenses in a way that feels humiliating, and this humiliation can become a personal wound, especially for those who cling to the idea that status should equal comfort. Here the merchant's cleverness becomes important, because merchants do not only sell goods, they manage flows, they lend, they store, they broker, they connect people, and sometimes they become the quiet bankers of a world that publicly pretends it does not need bankers, and in this way Edo becomes modern in spirit, even if not in machines, because finance is not only about money, it is about confidence and distribution. If you step into a larger merchant house, you will see a structure that looks like a small government: the master, the senior clerks, the junior clerks, the apprentices, the storehouses, the careful packaging, the strict rules of conduct, sometimes the household shrine, because commerce and morality blend together, and the merchant wants not only profit but the image of being upright, and he will train his people to show humility, to speak politely, to avoid loudness, to avoid drunken scandal. Because scandal harms business like rot harms wood. And in the street, among smaller vendors, the economy is faster, more immediate: a noodle stall selling quick meals, a seller of grilled fish calling out, children buying sweets with tiny coins, and you can see how Edo supports a kind of microeconomy. The poor can still buy something small, and the city becomes a place where even small pleasure is commercial. A warm bowl of soba is not only food, it is a purchased comfort, a pause in the day that costs money but feels worth it. Now, the act of bargaining exists, but Edo bargaining is often polite, not always loud conflict. It can be a subtle dance, a customer showing hesitation, a shopkeeper offering a small extra, a slight discount, a better quality for a loyal buyer, and behind this dance is the constant awareness that the relationship may continue tomorrow, so you do not want to win too hard today, because winning too hard breaks future trust. And in that sense, Edo commerce teaches patience, it teaches long thinking, not always, but often. There are also traveling peddlers, people who bring goods to neighborhoods, who become familiar faces, who know who likes what, who sells needles, cloth, small tools, and these peddlers act like moving threads connecting districts, and with them travel news, rumors, small bits of entertainment, because in a world without instant media, the movement of people is also the movement of information. And a city is partly made of the stories that travel through its streets. Information can affect prices too. A bad harvest rumor can raise rice anxiety, a fire in a district can affect supply of certain goods, a political order can change what is allowed, and in Edo, people listen carefully, because listening is a survival skill. You want to know which way the wind is blowing, both literally and socially. Now consider the daily rhythm of a shop: morning cleaning, arranging goods, greeting the first customers, handling deliveries, counting stock, making small repairs, writing notes, sending an apprentice to collect payment, receiving a supplier, and then the afternoon wave: more customers, more talk, more fatigue, and by evening, closing shutters, counting money, checking ledgers, planning tomorrow. And all of this is done with a sense of constant alertness, because theft exists, scams exist. Dishonest customers exist, dishonest sellers exist, and yet the system functions because most people cannot afford to destroy trust. Trust is the foundation that allows credit and repeated trade, so the city self-regulates through social pressure, guild structures, and practical caution. In the artisan world, skill is a kind of pride and economic strength. Carpenters, printers, lacquer workers, metal workers, paper makers, people whose hands produce beauty and utility, and their daily life is shaped by deadlines, by customer expectations, by the availability of materials, by competition, because Edo has many artisans, and if you are not good, customers drift away. But if you are very good, your name can travel, your work can appear in the homes of the wealthy, and suddenly you become not rich like a lord, but stable, respected, and that stability is a treasure in a crowded city. And then there are the carriers, the laborers, the people who move heavy things, barrels, bundles, wood, rice sacks, and their economy is physical. Their bodies are their tools, their wages depend on strength, endurance, and also connections, because even labor networks have their leaders, their regular clients, their routes, and in a city built on movement, movers are essential, and yet often invisible in stories. So we bring them into our boring history, because boredom is not emptiness. Boredom is the steady presence of overlooked lives. At the edges of all this, you find informal economies too: gambling in small corners, unlicensed selling, nighttime deals, people making money in ways not fully approved, because where rules exist, loopholes grow, and Edo is a city of rules, therefore Edo is also a city of cleverness, and this cleverness can be admired, feared, or punished depending on who is watching. A major economic force that ties everything together is the seasonal festival cycle, because festivals bring crowds, crowds bring spending, spending brings profit, and people plan around these cycles. Craftsmen produce festival goods, food sellers prepare, entertainers schedule, and even ordinary families will save a little to enjoy, because pleasure is not free, and saving is another hidden daily act in Edo. Putting aside coins slowly, refusing some luxuries today for a better day later. If you pause and listen in a busy commercial street, you can hear the economy as sound: the clack of wooden clogs, the rustle of cloth, the small ring of coins, the polite greetings, the vendor calls, the rolling wheels of carts, and under it all, the gentle anxiety of everyone trying to stay afloat, because even in a prosperous city, most people are not safe from sudden misfortune, sickness, fire, debt, a bad employer, a ruined shipment, and this vulnerability makes people work harder, plan more carefully, pray more routinely, and look for small joys whenever possible. In the next part, we will follow the economy into the stomach of the city, the food world, the markets, the fish supply, the rice flow, the street meals, the cooking habits, and the subtle social meanings of what you eat and where you eat it, because in Edo, food is not only nutrition, it is identity, class, season, and comfort, and by understanding what people eat, we will understand how they live, and how a huge city stays fed day after day without modern refrigeration, without trucks, without supermarkets, only with water routes, human hands, and a disciplined rhythm. So for now, we close the shop shutters in the evening, we watch an apprentice count coins by lamplight, we watch a samurai pass quietly, trying to appear dignified even if his purse is light, we watch a vendor pack up his stall, tired but satisfied, and we feel Edo's money world not as drama, but as routine, the gentle repetitive heartbeat of commerce, keeping everyone moving, one small transaction at a time. In Edo, food is the most constant story, because even when politics shifts quietly in the background, even when fashion changes, even when rumors arrive and leave, the city must eat, and a city like Edo must eat in an organized way, because hunger is not a small problem here, hunger is a threat to order, and order is everything, so the movement of food becomes one of the greatest daily rhythms. As reliable as the sunrise, yet fragile enough that one storm, one fire, one bad shipment can make people tense without saying the word fear. You can smell the food world before you see it, the briny sharpness of fish near the water routes, the sweet steamed softness of rice when it is cooking in many homes, the smoky heat of grilled skewers sold on the street, the slightly fermented comfort of miso, the salt and soy in the air near certain shops, and even if you close your eyes, the city tells you what time it is by the way it smells, morning rice, midday noodles, evening broths, and in between, small snacks that make a hard day feel lighter. The fish market world is one of Edo's most famous realities, because Edo is close to the sea, and because fish becomes both ordinary and essential, not luxury for a few, but part of daily eating for many, and fish arrives fresh through human effort, boats and carriers working in the early hours, moving baskets quickly, because time is the enemy of freshness, and freshness is everything, and in this world, speed is not the speed of engines, it is the speed of trained bodies and practiced routes. Imagine fishermen bringing catches, imagine auctions and rapid selling, imagine baskets carried on poles, imagine vendors shouting in those musical calls, and then imagine the fish being cleaned, cut, salted, grilled, simmered, and sold again in smaller forms, because the market is not one place, the market is a network. Big markets supply smaller sellers supply neighborhoods, neighborhoods become kitchens, kitchens become bodies, and bodies become the energy that keeps the city working. Rice is the heavier story. Rice is not only food, it is money in spirit, it is status, it is security, it is the center of meals, and in a society where stipend systems connect to rice, rice carries political meaning too, but for daily life, rice is the base, the normal bowl, the quiet comfort, and also the source of worry when prices shift, because when rice becomes expensive, everything feels uncertain, and people speak about it like weather, with cautious expressions and small sighs. Markets for rice are not just stalls, they can be brokers, warehouses, measurement systems, and a culture of fairness that must be performed, because cheating in measurement can cause anger, and anger can cause disorder, and disorder is dangerous, so measurement becomes ritual, scoops, scales, and watchful eyes, because people have learned through experience that the simplest dishonesty can become a spark, and sparks in Edo can become fire, in every meaning. Vegetables move with the seasons, roots and greens, pickles prepared to survive time, dried goods to survive humidity, seaweed and beans, and the genius of Edo eating is not luxurious variety every day, it is flexibility, it is making simple ingredients feel satisfying through techniques, broth, soy, miso, pickling, grilling, steaming, and these techniques are not only culinary art, they are survival knowledge. Passed through families, taught to apprentices in kitchens, repeated so often that the hands almost cook by themselves. Street food is where Edo becomes especially alive, because street food is the meeting point of the working city and quick pleasure. You do not need to be wealthy to enjoy a warm bowl of noodles, you do not need to own a kitchen to buy grilled fish, you do not need time to sit at home if your day is crowded, you can eat standing, you can eat walking. You can eat in small stalls where the steam fogs your face and makes you feel hidden for a moment from the judgment of the world. Soba, buckwheat noodles, becomes one of the most famous Edo foods, partly because it fits the city's rhythm, it is fast, it is warm, it is satisfying, it can be sold in many forms, and soba sellers become part of the soundscape, calling out, moving through streets, sometimes carrying their stall setup, and when you imagine the long working day, the apprentice hungry, the carrier tired, the clerk drained, you can see why a hot bowl of soba feels like a gift. And with soba comes broth, and with broth comes the importance of soy sauce and dashi, because flavor is not accidental, it is planned, it is extracted from ingredients through careful boiling and timing, and the city's appetite shapes industries, soy brewers, miso makers, fish stock makers, producers of dried bonito, and through them, whole economic chains form, because food is not just eating. Food is production and transport and storage and trust again. If you go deeper into neighborhood food, you see how meals are built around simplicity, rice, soup, pickles, maybe a small piece of fish, maybe tofu, maybe vegetables, and you see that the concept of a meal is often balanced rather than extravagant, and for the poor, this balance can become thinner, more rice, less fish, more pickles, less fresh vegetables in certain seasons, and yet even then, the culture values making the simple meal feel complete, because the meal is also a moment of dignity. Tea is another daily companion. Tea is not only ceremony in its high form, tea is also ordinary comfort, boiled water with leaves, warmth in cold weather, a pause for conversation, and tea houses exist not only for elites but for travelers and workers too, places where you can sit briefly, drink, hear news, rest your legs, and in that way, food spaces become information spaces. And information spaces become social glue. Sweets exist too, not always rich, but small, bean paste treats, rice cakes, seasonal sweets sold during festivals, and these sweets are meaningful because they are not necessary, they are chosen, and choosing something unnecessary is a small declaration that life can be more than labor, and in Edo, that declaration matters, because labor can feel endless, so small pleasures keep people human. The city's food logistics also include fuel, charcoal, firewood, because cooking requires heat, and heat requires supply, and supply requires networks, and networks require order, so you begin to see how everything connects. The fish seller depends on charcoal, charcoal depends on carriers, carriers depend on noodles, noodles depend on flour and water, water depends on wells and carriers. And each part of this chain is a potential point of failure, which is why the city values routine and carefulness. Now, imagine a festival day. The food world shifts, more stalls appear, more grilling, more sweet smells, more crowds, and even people who normally eat simply will spend a little more, because festivals are social events. You want to be seen enjoying, you want your children to have a treat, you want to participate in the community's joy, and this community joy is also controlled by rules, by timing, by permitted areas. Because large crowds are both profitable and dangerous in a city built of wood and paper. You also begin to notice that where you eat can signal who you are. A samurai might avoid certain street stalls to maintain dignity. A merchant may eat in certain places that show his taste. An artisan might have favorite vendors, and ordinary people will have their own pride too, their chosen foods, their chosen shops, because taste becomes identity, and identity is one of the few personal freedoms available inside strict social structure. And then there is alcohol, sake, which can be a daily drink for some and a special occasion for others. Sake shops and drinking spaces become places where stress loosens, where jokes sharpen, where arguments can begin, and where friendships can deepen. And in Edo, drinking is not only personal, it is social, it can bond people, it can also cause trouble, and because the city wants stability. Excessive drunken disorder is disliked, yet it cannot be removed, because people need release, and a controlled society always produces pressure that seeks a vent. The food world also reveals gender roles in daily life, because many household food tasks fall on women: buying, cooking, managing ingredients, stretching limited resources, and this management is skilled work, not glamorous, but essential. And when you see a woman choosing vegetables carefully, bargaining quietly, planning meals around price and season, you are seeing the household economy in action. And that household economy is just as real as merchant ledgers. Now, let us hold one everyday scene: a boy carrying a small bowl wrapped in cloth, delivering food from a shop to a customer, or bringing soup to a sick neighbor, the steam trapped inside the cloth, the boy walking carefully so he does not spill. And in that small image, you can see Edo's food culture as a social culture. Food is not only consumed, it is shared, it is given, it is used to show care, and in a dense neighborhood, care and reputation travel together. In the next part, we will move from food to appearance, clothing, hair, footwear, and the visible language of class and occupation, because in Edo, what you wear is not simply personal preference, it is a message, a boundary, sometimes a requirement, sometimes a subtle rebellion. And by studying clothing and grooming, we will see how people navigate rules while still trying to look good, to feel proud, to express taste inside constraints. So for now, we leave the market, our hands smelling faintly of fish and soy. We carry a warm bowl of noodles in our imagination. We watch steam rise like a soft curtain between us and the busy street, and we feel how Edo stays alive, not through big speeches, but through endless small meals, endlessly repeated, day after day, until history becomes routine, and routine becomes the quiet heartbeat of a city. In Edo, clothing is not only clothing, it is a passport, a warning sign, a polite introduction, a social boundary, a quiet statement of what you are allowed to be, and what you are not allowed to pretend to be, because the city is organized like a layered painting. and clothes are the lines that keep the layers from blending too much, so when you look at a person, before you hear them speak, you already read a story. Not always accurately, not always fairly, but the city is trained to read these stories quickly, because quick reading prevents conflict, and conflict threatens order. The first thing you notice is that Edo fashion is built around fabric that moves, folds, ties, opens, closes, breathes, and shifts with the weather, because kimono is not stiff armor, it is a flexible envelope, and the way it hangs tells you what kind of day a person is having, whether they are working, visiting, carrying something heavy, going to a festival, going to a shop, going to a bathhouse, or simply trying to look decent while doing ordinary errands, and this flexibility creates a world where even small adjustments matter, the sleeve folded back slightly, the hem lifted, the obi tied differently, the collar set in a certain angle, and these details become a language spoken without sound. Kimono itself is not one thing, it is a family of garments, layers, seasonal variations, informal forms, more formal forms, and a set of rules that people learn slowly through practice and correction, because in Edo you can be judged for doing something wrong in appearance, not necessarily punished by law, but punished by the coldness of laughter, by the subtle tightening of smiles, by the soft insult of someone helpfully telling you the proper way, and in a city where reputation matters, people often prefer the safety of correct appearance, even if they secretly want to be careless. The city's climate shapes everything. Summer heat demands lighter fabrics, looser feeling, sometimes less layering, winter demands warmth and thick cloth, and rain demands practicality, straw coats, umbrellas, quick changes, and in a place made of wood and paper, rain is both relief and inconvenience. Relief because it can reduce fire risk and cool the air. Inconvenience because it turns streets into slick surfaces and makes sandals and hems dirty, so you see people adjusting their clothing with the weather the way modern people adjust with jackets, but here it feels more continuous, more like clothing is always in conversation with the sky. Footwear is another story, and it is a story of sound, because Edo streets speak back through your feet, straw sandals, wooden geta, sometimes quiet soft footwear inside houses, and the city becomes musical in a way, a rhythm of footfalls, soft slaps of sandals, sharper clacks of wood, the sound changing by district, by crowd density, by season, and when you listen long enough you can identify the social mood by sound alone. Festival days louder, rainy days softer, early morning sparse, evenings tired and scattered, and within this soundscape, shoes are not just protection, they are identity, the worker's worn straw, the merchant's careful maintenance, the visitor's cleaner look, and the way someone walks can tell you whether they are used to carrying weight, whether they are rushing for duty, whether they are showing confidence, or trying to disappear. Hair is perhaps even more controlled than clothing, because hair can be a symbol of status, discipline, tradition, and professional identity, and Edo hairstyles are not random, they are shaped by social expectation and practical life. For many men there are styles connected to adulthood and belonging. For samurai the top-knot style becomes iconic, but within that icon there are differences. And for townspeople there are their own common shapes, and for women, hair can become a serious project. Arranged, oiled, pinned, sometimes requiring assistance, sometimes requiring money, and hair becomes a kind of public art, a structure that says, I care, I know the rules, I am part of this world, and at the same time it can be uncomfortable, heavy, strict, and it can turn ordinary activities into careful movements, sleeping in ways that preserve the style, avoiding rain, avoiding careless gestures, and in that way, beauty becomes discipline. Clothing also shows the hidden economy of dyeing and fabric production, because to dress well you need cloth, and cloth has a story: cotton, hemp, silk, and the more expensive the fabric, the more social meaning it carries. But Edo society also likes subtlety, especially among those who must appear humble, so there is an aesthetic of restrained elegance, beautiful but not shouting, refined patterns hidden, rich textures and muted colors, a clever way of being stylish while not breaking the moral script. And this is where you begin to see Edo taste, the taste of doing something impressive quietly, like a whisper that only the right people understand. If you walk through merchant districts, you may see shopkeepers dressed neatly but not extravagantly, because a merchant wants to look trustworthy and respectable, not flashy. And yet merchants also love quality, they love craftsmanship, they love textiles, so they invent ways to show taste without looking arrogant: a perfectly tied obi, a clean collar, a coat with a subtle pattern, a good comb, good sandals. And this kind of careful modesty is itself a form of pride, because it says, I have control, I have order, I am stable, and stability in Edo is attractive. Stability is power. Samurai clothing carries its own burden, because samurai must perform status even when their finances are strained. They must look like samurai, they must maintain the outer sign of an inner code, and the pressure of this performance is heavy, because clothing costs money, maintenance costs money, and a samurai who looks shabby risks embarrassment. Yet a samurai who looks too luxurious might look morally questionable, because the world expects them to be disciplined, not indulgent. So samurai appearance becomes a balancing act: dignity without extravagance, authority without vanity. And you can see this in the careful way they wear layers, in the clean lines, in the controlled color choices, in the way they move as if they are aware that people are watching even when no one is openly staring. Artisans, meanwhile, often wear clothing that reflects work: durable fabrics, sleeves tied back, practical aprons, clothing that can survive dust, ink, wood shavings, lacquer. And for artisans, clothing can become a badge of craft, not fancy but confident, because skill is their identity, and a skilled artisan does not need silk to feel respected, though some will still enjoy fine details when they can afford it, because everyone enjoys feeling beautiful, even in a strict society. And this is one of the quiet truths: Edo rules do not erase vanity, they only reshape it into acceptable forms. Grooming is another daily ritual: washing face, combing hair, maintaining nails, cleaning teeth in the methods of the time, keeping clothing clean as possible despite the dusty streets and crowded living. And these acts may seem small, but they become the difference between being treated as respectable or being treated as careless. And in a city of tight community watching, grooming is social armor. It does not stop a sword, but it stops whispers, or at least reduces them. There are also rules and expectations about who can wear what, sometimes explicit, sometimes enforced through social pressure rather than direct law, because Edo society likes visible stability, it likes categories that look clear from the outside. And while life is always more complicated, the city still tries to keep the surface organized, and that surface is clothing. So a person who dresses above their station risks attracting attention, and attention is dangerous, not because fashion. Police will appear instantly, but because attention invites questions, and questions invite officials, and officials invite records, and records invite trouble. And in Tokugawa Edo, trouble is often bureaucratic before it becomes physical. So people learn a careful art, the art of looking good while staying safe, the art of being stylish within boundaries, and this is where small tricks appear, lining fabric with something nicer that only you know is there, wearing darker outer layers that look simple but are made well, choosing patterns that are acceptable but still personal, using accessories quietly, a particular kind of cord, a particular fan, a particular tobacco pouch, a particular comb, and because fans are common, a fan becomes a perfect tool for subtle style. It is functional, it is social, it is expressive, and you can see someone flick it open with a practiced motion, not to show off, but still somehow showing off, because human beings cannot fully resist the desire to be seen, even in a world that tells them to be modest. The fan also connects to manners, because Edo manners are a choreography, bowing, speaking, waiting, stepping aside, not blocking someone's path, and clothing affects how you perform manners. Long sleeves require controlled movement, layered garments require a certain posture, wooden sandals require careful step rhythm, and if you wear clothing badly, your manners look clumsy, and if your manners look clumsy, people assume your upbringing is clumsy, and upbringing is connected to trust. So once again, clothing is not only cloth, it is social meaning, and the city reads it constantly. Consider how a person enters a shop, how they stand, how they greet, how they remove or adjust footwear if needed, how they handle goods, how they point, how they ask price, how they refuse, because refusal is an art too. You do not just say, no, you soften it, you protect the seller's dignity, you protect your own dignity, you keep the social air smooth, and in Edo, smooth air matters more than winning a small conflict. Because conflict is sticky, it stays in memory, it returns in future. Interactions. Clothing and grooming also change during festivals, and festival fashion is a controlled explosion, brighter fabrics, special coats, coordinated family looks, children dressed neatly, hair arranged, and even poor families will try to present their best, because festivals are public theaters, and public theater is where reputation is built, and reputation is a currency that can last longer than a handful of coins. So people save, they borrow, they plan, they repair old garments, they re-dye cloth, they patch carefully, they borrow accessories from relatives, and in that way, festival days reveal both aesthetic desire and economic strategy. Now imagine the pleasure districts, the entertainment zones, where clothing becomes more expressive, where hairstyles can become more elaborate, where the floating world aesthetic becomes visible, because the floating world is partly about beauty, about performance, about stepping out of everyday restrictions into a space where rules are different, not fully free, but different, and in those districts, people dress to be noticed, to be admired, to be remembered, and the city's ordinary restraint becomes softer there, like a knot loosened slightly, and this is why pleasure districts fascinate people. They are not only about pleasure, they are about contrast. The contrast makes the ordinary city feel more ordinary and the special city feel more special. Even outside those districts, the influence of fashion spreads. Woodblock prints, ukiyo-e, show famous actors, famous courtesans, famous styles, and ordinary people look at these images the way modern people look at celebrities. They copy certain details, they talk about them, they imitate them in modest ways, and suddenly you have a kind of Edo pop culture, not through screens, but through prints and gossip. And this culture influences what people want, how they tie an obi, how they shape their eyebrows, how they choose a pattern, and you can see Edo becoming modern again, because it has trends, and trends create desire, and desire feeds the economy. But trends must still pass through rules, so a trend becomes filtered. A rich person can follow it fully, a poorer person follows it partially, using cheaper fabric or simpler technique, and this creates a layered fashion system, one style, many versions, and even within strict social categories, people find ways to express individuality, because the human need for individuality never disappears, it only adapts. Now think of maintenance, because Edo clothing is not disposable, it is repaired, washed carefully, aired, folded, stored, protected from moisture, protected from insects, and in small homes, storing clothing is an art, folding, stacking, using chests, using paper, using herbs or smoke to repel pests, and clothing becomes a long-term investment, something you care for like you would care for a tool, because it is a tool for warmth, for dignity, for social acceptance, for future opportunities, and in that way, the daily act of folding clothing becomes a daily act of protecting your social future. If you want to picture Edo at the most ordinary moment, imagine someone shaking out a kimono in the morning light, checking for damage, adjusting the collar, tying the obi, then stepping outside carefully, and in that moment, the person becomes part of the city's moving pattern, a fabric pattern, thousands of moving patterns, each one controlled by rule, by habit, by taste, by money, by season. And the city becomes a living textile, a giant weaving of human beings moving through wooden streets. And because we are making a long boring history, we can stay in these details for a long time, because there is something hypnotic about a world where every small movement is part of a social design, how you step, how you bow, how you hold a fan, how you tie a cord, how you fold a sleeve, and the repetition becomes soothing, because it feels like the city has learned how to keep itself stable through routine, and routine is the true background music of Edo. In the next part, we will go fully into entertainment, theater, kabuki, ukiyo-e, tea houses, festivals, street performances, and the floating world that gives Edo its famous romantic image, but we will keep it grounded, not dramatic. We will focus on the daily mechanics of entertainment, ticket selling, crowd behavior, performer routines, how people travel to shows, how they talk about actors, how they buy prints, how they eat snacks during performances, how the city uses entertainment as a pressure release, because a city under rules always needs release, and Edo builds that release into its culture like a valve. So for now, we end part 5 with the sound of sandals on a wooden bridge, the rustle of layered cloth in a light wind, the quiet scrape of a comb in the morning, the small snap of a fan opening, and the calm knowledge that in Edo, you do not simply wear clothing, you wear a social map, and you learn to walk inside that map without tearing it, day after day, season after season, until even the act of dressing becomes history, and history becomes routine. In Edo, entertainment is not a side story, it is a necessary organ, because a city that demands discipline all day cannot survive without some kind of release, and Edo's release is carefully shaped, managed, sold, admired, whispered about, and repeated, so even pleasure becomes routine, even excitement becomes a system, and if you watch closely, you realize that the floating world is not only about beauty or escape, it is about structure, because the same society that controls daily life also builds places where daily life can loosen safely, like opening a window in a crowded room without letting the room collapse. You can feel entertainment before you arrive at a theater, because you start to notice small signals, a more decorated signboard, a cluster of people moving in the same direction, vendors setting up stalls, paper lanterns appearing earlier than usual, and voices changing tone, because people sound slightly different when they are not going to work. They sound lighter, they sound like they have permission to be a little less careful. And that permission itself is a kind of product, something the city sells to itself. Kabuki is one of the most visible symbols of Edo entertainment, but the real story is not only the performance, it is the entire day around it, because a kabuki performance is not always a short event, it can be long, it can be a full experience, and the audience does not behave like silent modern audiences. The audience is part of the environment, eating, reacting, talking, recognizing, acknowledging their favorite actors, and in that way, kabuki becomes a living social space where everyone can see each other, not only the stage. Before the show, there is preparation, people choose what to wear, slightly nicer, slightly more presentable, because going to kabuki is going out into society, it is being seen, it is joining the crowd, and in Edo, being seen in the right place at the right time is part of status even for ordinary townspeople, because you may not have political power, but you can have cultural participation. And cultural participation feels like belonging to the city's heartbeat. The theater itself is an ecosystem, tickets, seating, crowded entrances, staff guiding people, vendors selling snacks, people saving seats, people arriving early, people arriving late, and the whole thing is controlled but also energetic, because the crowd wants excitement, and excitement is messy, yet the city prefers order, so theaters become a compromise between mess and order. Rules that allow a controlled chaos. Like a river channeled into a useful path. The actors become celebrities, and celebrity is not a modern invention, Edo proves it, because people talk about actors the way people talk about famous singers today, not only their performances, but their looks, their style, their private life rumors, their rivalries, and even their favorite poses and gestures. And these poses can become iconic, repeated, imitated, and then frozen in prints, and those prints travel, spreading the celebrity image beyond the theater, into ordinary homes, into shops, into conversation. Ukiyo-e, woodblock prints, are the quiet mass media of Edo, and they do something powerful, they make beauty portable, they make fame purchasable, they make a moment repeatable, because you can buy a print and bring it home, you can show it to a friend, you can pin it, store it, display it, and suddenly your home has a piece of the city's glamorous world inside it, even if your home is a small Nagaya room, and that feeling matters, because it is a way of stepping beyond your daily constraints, without physically leaving your neighborhood. The printing world has its own daily routine, the designers, the carvers, the printers, the publishers, the sellers, and the process is both art and industry, because prints are produced in quantity, and quantity requires organization, materials, paper supply, ink supply, labor skill, and time, and when you realize this, you see entertainment not as spontaneous fun, but as an economy, as structured work, as people earning wages through the production of dreams. The tea houses, meanwhile, are a different kind of entertainment space, not always about formal tea ceremony, often about social meeting, about hosting, about conversation, about the choreography of hospitality, and tea houses operate with rules, because hospitality is not only kindness, it is reputation, and a tea house's reputation depends on how it treats guests, how it manages privacy, how it controls conflict, how it keeps the atmosphere smooth, and the atmosphere is the product, more than the tea itself. Privacy is a strange word in Edo entertainment, because entertainment spaces are public yet people seek private moments within them, a quiet corner, a screened room, a subtle conversation, a meeting that should not be fully visible, and because Edo society watches, people become skilled at hiding in plain sight, using the crowd as cover, using polite language as a mask, using routine gestures as camouflage. And entertainment districts become the perfect environment for this, because everyone expects unusual encounters, therefore unusual encounters are less suspicious. Festivals, Matsuri, are the city's seasonal heartbeat, and festival entertainment is not only about religion or tradition, it is about community display, because people want to show their neighborhood strength, their unity, their pride, and they do this through processions, music, dance, portable shrines, lanterns, food stalls, games, and in a city where daily life is repetitive, festivals are controlled disruptions. Moments where the repetition is allowed to change, and that change feels like breathing deeper for a while. On festival nights, the city's lights multiply, lanterns glow, the darkness becomes softer, and the smell of grilling fills streets, and the soundscape changes, drums, flutes, shouting, laughter, and the old rules still exist, but they loosen, like a belt loosened after a meal, and people become slightly bolder, children run more freely, adults smile more openly, strangers talk more easily, and in those moments, you can feel the city as a community rather than a machine. But even festivals are managed, because crowds can be dangerous, fire risk rises, theft rises, arguments rise, so there are watchmen, there are local organizers, there are routes, there are expected behaviors, and if you imagine festivals as purely free joy, Edo reminds you that freedom is never fully free, it is permitted, guided, structured, and this structure is what allows thousands of people to celebrate without the city collapsing into chaos. Entertainment also produces a special kind of gossip, because gossip needs subjects, and entertainment provides subjects, actors, famous courtesans, rich merchants, samurai scandals, strange incidents, love affairs, sudden disappearances, new styles, new songs, new jokes, and in Edo, gossip travels fast, faster than boats sometimes, because gossip travels through mouths, through tea houses, through bathhouses, through markets, through neighbors leaning across corridors, and gossip becomes the city's nervous system, transmitting emotional information, not always accurate, but always influential. And here we arrive at the pleasure districts, the famous zones like Yoshiwara in Edo, places that are controlled and separated, because the shogunate understands that desire exists, it cannot be erased, so it is contained, regulated, taxed, watched, and in this containment, the city creates a space where the floating world image becomes strongest, the world of lantern light, carefully arranged beauty, music, conversation, and the sense that ordinary rules can be negotiated, even if not fully broken. Now, we must speak carefully, because when people imagine pleasure districts, they jump to extremes, but the daily reality is often quieter and more routine than the fantasy. There are schedules, there are staff, there are bills, there are rules, there are hierarchies, and many of the people working there live under constraints, with obligations, with management, and the glamorous surface hides a heavy structure beneath. And if you want to understand Edo honestly, you must see both, the glitter and the ledger, the poetry and the paperwork. For customers, visiting such districts can be a ritual, saving money, choosing the right time, dressing appropriately, bringing gifts, making arrangements through intermediaries, and all of this becomes another economic and social system, because pleasure is expensive, and because it is expensive, it becomes a marker of status, and because it is a marker of status, people talk about it, admire it, envy it, criticize it, and use it to measure each other's lives. For ordinary townspeople who cannot afford such experiences, the floating world still reaches them through prints, through stories, through cheaper entertainment, street performances, puppet shows, small music events, storytelling, and the city offers entertainment at many levels, because entertainment is an industry, and an industry wants customers, and customers exist across classes. So the city develops a layered entertainment menu, expensive experiences for the wealthy, affordable pleasures for the many. Street performers and storytellers also fill the city, because people love narratives, they love hearing dramatic tales, ghost stories, heroic stories, romantic tragedies, comedic sketches, and these performers often work like moving newspapers, gathering a crowd, holding attention, and earning coins, and their success depends on reading the mood, the weather, the time of day, because Edo audiences are not passive. They are practical, they are busy, and if you bore them too much, they walk away. So even in a boring history world, real-life entertainers must not be boring, they must balance excitement and familiarity. There is also a quieter entertainment, reading, poetry, games like Go or Shogi, small gatherings, listening to music in private homes, and these entertainments show that Edo culture is not only public spectacle, it is also private refinement, and this private refinement becomes a way for people to feel meaning, to feel self-respect, to feel that their life is more than labor, and in a society where status is fixed, inner refinement can feel like a personal achievement that status cannot fully control. And when you look at the city's nights, you begin to understand that entertainment is also about time, because daytime belongs to work and duty, and nighttime belongs to risk and release, and the city manages night carefully, gates, patrols, watchman calls, lantern regulations, yet people still seek night, because night changes the psychology of streets, it makes faces less readable, it makes conversations quieter, it makes secrets easier, and it makes beauty more dramatic under lantern light. In all these spaces, etiquette still matters, even when loosened, because Edo people carry their social training into entertainment, they bow, they speak politely, they avoid making direct conflict, they know how to compliment, how to decline, how to leave without insulting, and this etiquette is what makes entertainment spaces feel safe enough for many people to participate, because in a crowded world, safety is not only physical, safety is emotional, it is the confidence that you will not be humiliated publicly. Ukiyo-e prints become a bridge between daily life and entertainment, because prints show fashionable outfits, famous scenes, seasonal festivals, beautiful landscapes, actors in dramatic poses, and ordinary people buy these prints not just as art but as lifestyle inspiration, as conversation pieces, as proof that they are connected to the city's cultural pulse. And you can imagine a small family in a Nagaya room hanging a print and feeling, for a moment, that their life is part of something bigger, something colorful, something worth remembering. Now, the entertainment world also brings danger, because crowds attract pickpockets, drinking attracts fights, jealousy attracts violence, and the shogunate knows this, so policing becomes more present in entertainment districts, and that policing is another system, quiet presence, visible authority at key points, the reminder that fun is permitted but only within boundaries. And this boundary system creates a strange Edo feeling again, the feeling that even pleasure is supervised, and yet people still enjoy it, because human beings can enjoy even under supervision, as long as they have some room to breathe. In the next part, we will move into Edo's fears and controls, fire, crime, policing, night watch, punishments, neighborhood responsibility, because those systems explain why entertainment can exist without turning the city into chaos, and they also explain the constant background anxiety that sits behind Edo's beauty, because beauty in Edo is always standing next to danger, lantern light next to fire risk, crowded joy next to crowd panic, laughter next to strict authority, and it is this balance that makes Edo so alive and so perfect for a long, steady, hypnotic history. So for now, we leave the theater as the performance ends, people pour out into the street, vendors sell the last snacks, lanterns sway lightly, someone hums a tune, someone argues about which actor was best, a child falls asleep on a parent's back, and the city, even in pleasure, returns to routine, the floating world floating only for a while before settling back into the wooden everyday streets of Edo. In Edo, danger is never fully absent, it is simply managed, and the management itself becomes part of daily life, so much so that people grow used to living beside risk the way you grow used to living beside weather. You do not panic every time you see clouds, you just prepare, you adjust, you carry the umbrella of habit, and in Edo the umbrella is routine, because routine is what keeps a wooden city from falling apart. The most famous danger is fire, and fire is not only a dramatic event when it happens, fire is a constant background idea, a thought that lives in the way people place their charcoal, the way they hang lanterns, the way they store cloth, the way they sweep dust, the way they look at the wind, the way they listen for alarms at night, and when you understand this, you understand that Edo's calm is not ignorance, it is practice. A practiced calm that says, yes, fire is possible, therefore we must live in a way that reduces it, and if it still comes, we must respond together, quickly, without confusion. Because the city is built of wood and paper, and because people use flame daily, cooking, heating, lighting, incense, and because homes are close, workshops are busy, streets are tight, the city is always one mistake away from trouble, and so Edo develops a fire culture, rules, watchfulness, tools, communal expectations, and even a kind of fire psychology, a shared understanding that if you act selfishly during a fire, if you hesitate too long, if you block a path, if you take advantage of confusion to steal, the community will remember, and that memory can be more punishing than any official penalty, because it can follow you everywhere. You can hear fire prevention in the night watch calls, those human time signals that do more than announce the hour, they also remind people to be careful, to mind their lamps, to mind their coals, and there is something strangely comforting about a city that speaks to itself in the dark, as if Edo refuses to fully sleep, as if the city keeps one eye open all night to protect the other eye that dreams. When a fire breaks out, the city becomes movement, not random movement, practiced movement, people shout, people carry water, people run with buckets, people form lines, people move valuables, people help elders, and yes, there can be panic, but there is also an Edo instinct, a community instinct shaped by repetition and memory, because fires have happened before, therefore there are scripts, And even ordinary people know parts of those scripts: where to go, what to grab first, what to leave, which direction not to run. And in a world without modern emergency services as we imagine them, a city survives through collective coordination. Fire brigades exist, and they become symbols of civic pride: strong men, organized groups, tools, ladders, hooks, and a kind of daring reputation. And yet even here, the daily side is not always dramatic, because most days are not fire days. Most days are preparation days: checking equipment, practicing, responding to small incidents, keeping eyes open. And it is this most days that makes the system real. Because a system built only for rare hero moments would not function. Edo builds systems built for repetition. Now, fire is only one part. There is also crime. And crime in Edo is shaped by the same structure that shapes everything else: dense neighborhoods, strong social watching, strict rules, and economic pressure. Because where there is money moving, there is temptation; where there is poverty, there is desperation; and where there is strict order, there is always someone trying to slip through cracks. But Edo policing is not only men with authority walking around. It is also paperwork, checkpoints, neighborhood groups, responsibility networks. And this is one of the most important ideas, that the city enforces order not only through direct force, but through making communities responsible for themselves. Because when a neighborhood is responsible, neighbors watch neighbors, and watching is cheaper than constant armies. And watching also builds a culture where people learn to control themselves, because self-control is easier than punishment. You have neighborhood leaders, local officials, systems of reporting, and a social expectation that you do not bring trouble to your street, you do not embarrass your block, you do not create a problem that forces officials to ask questions, because questions lead to records, records lead to restrictions, and restrictions make daily life harder for everyone. So the community discourages disruptive behavior with soft pressure first: warnings, advice, gossip, cold looks, and only when something becomes serious does it move upward into official attention. This creates a special Edo feeling, where people are free in small ways: free to trade, free to enjoy festivals, free to argue quietly, but they are not free to create disorder openly. And they learn to keep their anger controlled, to handle disputes through mediation, to apologize when necessary, to accept certain humiliations rather than escalate, because escalation is expensive, it attracts eyes. And eyes in Edo are always connected to authority. Checkpoints and controlled movement matter too, because Edo is not a city where anyone can wander anywhere without consequence. Certain areas are more restricted, certain gates are watched, travel between regions can require permission, and even within the city there are boundaries that people respect automatically, not always because they fear immediate punishment, but because they have learned that boundaries are part of survival. Like not stepping into deep water if you cannot swim. Nighttime changes the entire balance, because in the dark, order becomes harder, faces become less readable, thieves become bolder, people become more tempted to break rules, and the city responds by becoming more watchful at night: patrols, watchmen, lantern rules, closing times, and a culture that encourages people not to wander too freely without reason. Because the city knows that night can create accidents even among good people. The night watch calls also serve as a reminder that the city is still operating, still counting time, still keeping its rhythm, and if you live in a Nagaya and you hear those calls, you may feel, in a small way, protected, because you know someone is awake, someone is walking, someone is listening, and in crowded wooden streets, that knowledge can be the difference between calm sleep and anxious sleep. Punishments exist, and they are part of the city's deterrent system, but the daily reality for most people is that they do not want to come near punishment at all. They want to live quietly, feed their family, keep their reputation intact, so punishment is like a distant cliff. You do not walk near it, you do not joke near it, you do not test how close you can get, and the fear of losing social standing often works as a softer barrier before legal fear is needed. In addition to official policing, the city uses moral messaging, stories, public examples, and the quiet education of children, because Edo teaches children early that certain behaviors bring shame, bring trouble, bring harm, and that your actions reflect on your household, and your household reflects on your neighborhood, and your neighborhood reflects on the city, and this chain of reflection becomes a powerful tool, because if your identity is linked to others, you cannot behave as if you live alone. But let us not pretend this makes Edo peaceful all the time. There are still disputes, there are still jealousies, there are still debts unpaid, there are still scams, there are still sudden incidents that disturb a street, and when such incidents occur, you will see the practical Edo response, people gathering, not always shouting, often watching carefully, someone running to inform the right person, a neighborhood leader stepping in, questions asked in polite tones that still feel sharp, and within minutes, a small crowd becomes a small court, not official, but social, and social courts can be harsh because they deal in reputation. Fire and crime also connect to economics, because if you are poor and your tools are stolen, you might lose your income. If your shop burns, you might lose everything, and so people develop habits of protection, hiding coins, keeping tools close, tying doors, using locks where possible, trusting only certain people, and again, trust becomes the city's most valuable and visible resource. Because you cannot protect everything alone in a dense environment, you must rely on others, therefore you must choose carefully who to rely on. Now imagine the role of the samurai in city order. Many samurai are administrators and enforcers. Their presence itself is a signal. They represent the shogunate's authority, and even when they do not act, their existence shapes behavior. People stand straighter, voices soften, conflicts pause, because the social hierarchy becomes real in the body, not only in the mind. At the same time, the shogunate understands that too much harshness can create resentment, and resentment can become instability, so Edo order is often a balancing act, strong enough to prevent chaos, flexible enough to let daily life continue, because the goal is not to crush the city, the goal is to keep it functioning, and this is why many Edo rules feel like management rather than constant violence. Management of movement, of trade, of gatherings, of neighborhoods. This management is also visible in how the city handles strangers, travelers, newcomers, because strangers bring uncertainty, they might bring disease, they might bring crime, they might bring new ideas, and the city's response is not always to reject strangers, because Edo needs trade and movement, but to track them, to know who they are, where they stay, why they are here, and this tracking can feel heavy. Yet it also provides a sense of safety for residents, because safety is not only comfort, safety is knowing that the city is watching the city. And if you think about it long enough, you see that Edo is like a living compromise between the desire for freedom and the fear of disorder, and the compromise is built into daily habits. Do not walk too late, do not light flames carelessly, do not insult neighbors publicly, do not attract official attention, pay debts on time, keep your shop front clean, follow festival rules, respect the watch calls, and in return, you get a city where millions can live close together without constant collapse. As our boring history continues, we can feel the calming effect of this order, because order produces predictability, and predictability is soothing. You know when markets open, you know when the bathhouse is busy, you know when the watchman calls, you know when festivals come, you know how to greet, how to bow, how to refuse, how to avoid conflict, and this predictability allows the mind to relax. Because the world's rules are known, even if they are strict. But behind predictability is always the reminder that something can break, a fire, a sudden crime, a political order, a shortage, and Edo lives with that reminder the way a sailor lives with the reminder of storms. You do not stop sailing, you simply learn to read the wind. In the next part, we will move outward into travel, roads, bridges, inns, courier routes, visits to shrines, movement between Edo and the wider Tokugawa world, because travel shows another side of order, how the shogunate controls movement, how people experience distance, how inns become little worlds of their own, how news travels, how gifts travel, how goods travel, and how Edo remains connected to the whole country like a heart connected to arteries. So for now, we listen to the night watch call one more time, the sound drifting through narrow streets, lantern light flickering softly, doors closed, charcoal safely covered, neighbors breathing in shared silence, and we understand that Edo's beauty is always standing on a foundation of carefulness, and carefulness, repeated every day, is what makes the city possible. Imagine you arrive in Edo without a dramatic entrance, no trumpets, no heroic music, just your own footsteps and the city's breath around you, and the first thing you notice is not one famous building, not one perfect view, but a steady rhythm that seems older than any single person, a rhythm made of wooden streets, sliding doors, water channels, market calls, and small polite greetings that repeat so often they feel like the city's heartbeat. Edo wakes in layers, not all at once, first the quiet movements, someone opening a door softly, someone stepping into a corridor in straw sandals, someone carrying water with a shoulder pole, the faint clack of wood against wood, then the first smells, rice steaming somewhere, miso warming, charcoal smoke rising gently, and only later the louder life begins. Vendors calling in long melodic phrases that travel down streets like birdsong, because in Edo, selling is not just speech, it is a soundscape. It tells you time, it tells you season, it tells you that the day has started whether you feel ready or not. You might expect a samurai city to look like swords and armor everywhere, but Edo's real look is timber and paper, endless timber and paper, posts, beams, bridges, fences, shutters, and paper screens that hold privacy in the thinnest way, because privacy here is not thick walls, privacy is etiquette, it is the shared agreement to pretend you did not hear too much. And you learn quickly that living in Edo is not about having space, it is about using small space correctly. If you walk deeper into ordinary neighborhoods, you find the Nagaya, long row houses where many lives sit close together like books on a shelf, each room small, each room flexible, bedding rolled away in the morning so the same space can become a dining space, a working space, a place for sewing, counting, mending, and then at night it becomes sleep again, and the corridor outside becomes a public hallway, a social lane, sandals lined neatly, umbrellas drying, small baskets waiting, and neighbors passing so near that a day cannot stay fully private even if you want it to. In Nagaya life you hear everything, a baby crying, a neighbor coughing, someone laughing, someone scolding a child, someone shaking dust from a mat, and the city teaches you to live with these sounds without anger, because anger spreads fast in crowded places, and reputation matters more than winning a moment. Reputation is a kind of shield, a kind of currency, because in Edo, being trusted means your life runs smoother. People help you, people lend to you, shopkeepers treat you well, and if you lose trust, doors close without anyone needing to shout at you. Water is a daily ritual, carried, fetched, used carefully, and the act of carrying water is one of those quiet repeated motions that makes Edo possible, and because water matters, bathing becomes a planned event, often in public bathhouses, where steam fills the air and conversation flows more freely than it does on the street, and the bathhouse becomes more than hygiene, it becomes social glue, a place where news travels, where moods soften, where the day's dust is washed away from skin and mind. Work pulls the city forward like a tide, shutters slide open, shop fronts are swept clean because sweeping is not only cleaning, it is an announcement. We are open, we are respectable, we are ready. Apprentices move quickly, heads slightly lowered, learning the language of business, the correct bow, the correct greeting, the correct way to stand, because a merchant house is not only a shop, it is a school of behavior, and behavior is part of profit. Edo commerce feels endless because it is made of small specialized pieces, tofu sellers, fishmongers, paper shops, umbrella makers, sandal makers, charcoal dealers, candle makers, noodle stalls, sweet sellers, repairers, barbers, carriers, scribes, and behind all of it, counting, ledgers, and the quiet art of credit, because money is not always exchanged instantly, trust is exchanged, relationships are exchanged, and a good customer is someone who returns, someone who pays, someone who keeps the social air smooth. There is a famous tension in Edo society. The official moral world says merchants are low, samurai are high, yet the city itself shows another truth. Some merchants are quietly powerful because they control money flow, supply flow, printing flow, while many samurai must live on stipends and pride is expensive when prices shift, so you will see a samurai walking with controlled dignity. A sword at his side is symbol and status, but his purse may be lighter than you expect, and you will see a merchant bowing humbly in public while privately maintaining networks that shape entire districts. Food is the city's constant story, because Edo must eat every day without trucks, without refrigerators, without modern engines, only with waterways, boats, carriers, and routine. Fish arrives early, the briny smell near canals tells you supply is moving. Rice is measured carefully because rice is not only food, it is security, it is a serious matter. Vegetables change with seasons. Dried goods and pickles help families survive price changes, and a simple meal becomes a kind of balance. Rice, soup, pickles, maybe tofu, maybe a little fish, and even when meals are modest they are shaped by technique, broth, soy sauce, miso, grilling, steaming, pickling, because skill turns simplicity into comfort. Street food is Edo's small daily pleasure, soba sold hot and fast, steam rising into your face like a curtain, a moment where the city feels softer, grilled snacks near busy streets, sweets that children beg for, tea served in small places where travelers and workers rest their legs, and you realize that in a city built on walking, resting becomes a business too, and comfort becomes something you can buy in small portions. Clothing in Edo is a social map, kimono layers adjusted for season, sleeves tied back for work, cleaner neat clothing for merchants who want to look trustworthy, controlled dignified styles for samurai who must perform status, and grooming becomes routine armor, combing hair, arranging collars, folding cloth carefully, because cloth is not disposable, it is repaired, re-dyed, protected from insects, stored carefully in small homes, and looking respectable is not vanity alone, it is survival. Because people treat you according to what they read on your body. Hair carries rules as well, styles signal adulthood, belonging, role, and for women especially hair can be a careful construction, pinned, oiled, arranged, requiring time and skill, and the more elaborate styles appear in entertainment spaces where beauty is part of the economy, but even ordinary people imitate trends quietly, borrowing small details, using subtle patterns. Because Edo loves refined beauty that whispers rather than shouts, elegance that stays inside boundaries. And then the city shifts toward evening, and the floating world begins to glow. Kabuki theaters draw crowds, not silent modern crowds but living crowds, eating, talking, reacting, admiring famous actors like celebrities, repeating their poses in conversation, buying prints that capture faces and styles, ukiyo-e traveling through the city like portable dreams, because in Edo, prints are mass media, they spread fashion, they spread gossip, they spread desire, and desire feeds the economy. Tea houses and entertainment districts operate with rules too. Hospitality is a performance, privacy is managed through screens and careful timing, and even pleasure is organized, because a society that controls daily life also controls the spaces where daily life loosens, not to destroy joy, but to contain it safely, like opening a valve so pressure does not break the whole machine. Festivals transform the city into controlled celebration, lanterns multiply, drums and flutes change the night sound, stalls fill streets with sweet and smoky smells, neighborhoods display pride, children run wider paths than usual, adults smile more openly, and the city feels like one community for a moment. Yet even here there is management, routes, watchfulness, organizers, because crowds bring risk. And risk is always near in a wooden city. Because the greatest shadow in Edo is fire, fire is not only a disaster when it happens, it is a constant background thought, shaping habits, shaping fear, shaping rules, charcoal covered carefully, lamps watched, wind noticed, water buckets placed, night watch calls drifting through darkness announcing time and warning people to be careful, and those calls are strangely comforting, the city speaking to itself, refusing to sleep fully, promising that someone is awake, someone is watching. Order in Edo is not only police in the street, it is neighborhood responsibility, leaders, records, mediation, the social pressure that says do not bring shame to your lane, do not bring trouble that attracts officials, because official attention means questions, and questions mean paperwork, and paperwork can make life harder for everyone, so communities often solve conflicts quietly, through hints, through polite warnings, through cold looks, through quick apologies, because in Edo, avoiding escalation is a skill as valuable as carpentry or counting. Night changes the city's mood, lantern light softens faces, streets become quieter but more uncertain, and people move with calm alertness, not panic, just awareness, because the city teaches you that safety is built from routine, closing doors, placing valuables carefully, trusting neighbors, listening for watch calls, and if you must walk late, you choose routes that feel familiar, that feel watched, that feel like the city's order still holds there. Travel exists beyond the city too. bridges and canals shaping movement inside Edo, and roads and inns connecting Edo to the wider Tokugawa world, travelers carrying news, goods, styles, rumors, and even pilgrimage groups moving with shared purpose. And travel is never just freedom, travel is planning, saving money, repairing sandals, packing light because every extra item is weight, choosing inns, following rules of movement. And when you return from travel, Edo's routine can feel like a familiar blanket, the market calls, the smell of soy, the crowded corridor sounds, the predictable rhythm of a city that holds millions through repeated habits. And then the day closes, bedding unrolled, rooms dim, neighbors' sounds soften, someone whispers, someone sighs, someone counts a few coins by lamplight before sleeping, and the last watch call fades, and you understand the real story of Edo city life, not the legend of swords, not the dramatic postcard, but the ordinary day that repeats until it becomes culture, the careful manners, the small meals, the polite commerce, the subtle fashion, the organized entertainment, the shared fear of fire. The neighborhood responsibility, the steady walking across bridges and streets, and the quiet truth that a wooden city survives not by miracle but by millions of careful actions repeated again and again, until routine becomes history, and history becomes the memory of a world.